In this video, we're talking about 10 potential league winners for fantasy football based on where they go in drafts right now. And first up, we're talking about the brand new Carolina Panthers wide receiver, Diontae Johnson. Now, here's the thing. In this video, we're trying to predict and pull out the players who are league winners, which means part of this is dependent on where they're going in the draft. I just want to clarify this because obviously I'm not going to say, oh, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Justin Jefferson, all these first-round picks are obviously going to help you win your league. But that's not the case with Diontae Johnson. He's not a first, second, third, fourth. He's none of those round picks. He actually goes as pick 71 overall in round 6 or 7, depending on how many players are in your league. So yes, Diontae Johnson is now a Panther, and he's joining an offense that last year ranked 28th in passing and 30th in overall offense. So that's not great, but that also shouldn't be the story this year for Carolina because in a lot of ways, they have a completely new offense and coaching staff. Really, the only thing that stayed the same is probably the most important thing, and that's their quarterback, Bryce Young, the former first overall pick from last year's draft, is now entering year 2. Yeah, he had a bad year last year, but he had no pieces, a terrible offensive line, not the greatest coach. But now basically all that has changed, starting with the new head coach, Dave Canales, who comes over. If we look right here, he spent 2022 as the quarterback's coach with Seattle, was with the team for years before this. And then this year as the quarterback's coach, Geno Smith wins comeback player of the year, looks great. Then last year was the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His first year as an offensive coordinator, what does he do? He gets them to the postseason led by Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield signs like a $100 million extension this offseason, and now he's the coach of the Carolina Panthers. A lot of success for this guy. And the team also upgraded their 27th ranked offensive line. When you look right here in free agency, they signed Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis to some pretty big deals. And then also Josh Nijman from the Packers is a good depth piece, can also start for them as a tackle. So these three pieces alone are going to improve that offensive line tremendously, but it didn't stop there because as you can see on the team changes page, this is from the fantasy blueprint, they also end up adding Diontae Johnson like we talked about, first round receiver Xavier Legette, and then second round running back Jonathan Brooks. I mean, all these positions now have a new position. That doesn't make much sense, but you get the point I was trying to make there. All the positions have been upgraded with new guys. And that starts with the wide receiver room. Like we were talking about Diontae Johnson here as a league winner. Here's his competition. Adam Thielen, who a lot of people will remember as being really good last year, but there was no real threats to anybody else earning targets on this team. Bryce Young wasn't throwing downfield. He didn't have time to, so the 33-year-old Adam Thielen got a lot of volume, but that was only the first half of the year. He slowed down in the second half. And then there's a rookie Xavier Legette, who's a raw prospect. He's big, fast, he's great after the catch, but he's still a raw prospect out of South Carolina. Diontae Johnson is the guy who profiles out on this team, who's still pretty young at just 27 years old and gets open consistently. I mean, here's how underrated Diontae Johnson is at earning targets. These are the most targeted receivers in the NFL since 2020. You have the guys you'd think about, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, and look down here at Diontae Johnson. Since 2020, he ranks 7th in the NFL in wide receiver or overall targets, 6th in wide receiver targets if you take out tight end Travis Kelce. The only guys ahead of him are all guys that go in like the first or second round of fantasy drafts. CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams. But Diontae goes in round 7 despite being that good at getting open, and he still had over 7 targets per game last year in what was considered a down year. But let's add a little bit more context to that. This is Draft Shark's injury dashboard. If you look last year, Diontae was dealing with a hamstring. He was dealing with this for about 5 or 6 weeks on the injury reports. I'm dealing with a hamstring injury right now. I know I'm not a professional athlete with that type of treatment. I've said this before, but hamstrings are a bitch. They could take 4 to 6 plus weeks and easily get aggravated again, and mentally, do you just kind of not going full speed for a couple of weeks as well is what I imagine. And then, oh yeah, he also was dealing with some combination, a weird combination of Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky. I mean, these were terrible options at the quarterback position. You're not getting any downfield targets, that's for sure. So right now in the fantasy blueprint, these are my top 250 rankings. Diontae Johnson is my 77th overall player. I'm about a half a round, as you can see right here, a difference in ADP. So I see him as a pretty nice value right now. And if we're talking about league winning potential, just this offense clicks, which it should, then his ceiling is way higher than that. Now we'll move from the wide receiver position to a running back position where I'm going to talk about a young player who's a league winner. And it's a first-year player. It's Trey Benson, the Arizona Cardinals rookie running back that they took in the second round of the draft. There's only 2 RBs to go in the second round or higher, and he was one of them. And now when you think about Benson going here, right away you might be thinking, oh, James Conner is there. Benson's really not going to get much work in year 1. And I'll admit it. I'll be completely honest with you. I thought this same exact thing moments after, in like a day or 2 after the draft, until I analyzed the situation a little bit deeper. And really until we started to get some average draft position where he was going, where Conner was going, and some things settled in. But first off, James Conner, yeah, he's getting older, but he was still good last year. You could see Jared Smola right here, a good Twitter follow. He basically points out all the spots where James Conner was great last year. 7th in points per game. RB1 in points per game from week 13 on. From week 13 on, he was the number 1 running back in fantasy. 4th in rushing yards, and then some of his efficiency stats, he was top 5 in PFF grade and next-gen stats. He was a good running back last year and also the year before as well. But there is one issue with James Conner, and it's this right here. If you look at his games played, he's missed at least 3 or more games in 4 out of his last 5 seasons. If we scroll back all the way here to 2019, and if you go back all the way to the beginning of his career in 2017, he's averaged 3.9, so we could just call it 4, missed games per year in his entire career every single year. And not to mention, he's been on the injury report for even more weeks than that, and now he's 29 years old, only getting older with all these injuries and a lot of touches piling on to that. You could expect him to probably miss some games this year, as most running backs do, especially one that's missed time in the past. So this is where I started to get a little bit interested in Trey Benson. As I saw, now he actually goes in round 10 of drafts, significantly later than James Conner, but Benson is the fresher player who comes into the NFL as, like, honestly, one of the most NFL ready backs you'll see for a lot of reasons, and we'll break those down. We can start with the production at Florida State, a bigger school that never really let their RBs be the RB1. That's why I only got 150 carries a year, but not a lot of usage on those tires, or the tread on the tires is still there, whatever you want to say. His overall rushing per carry was great, over 6 yards per carry. Factored in with the receiving yards here, he had over 1,100 total yards per year at a big conference with not a full-time 250 carry feature role. Benson was averaging 6.1 yards per carry per season. And in 2022, he had a top 3 broken tackle season ever. The only guys better than him, Kenneth Walker and David Montgomery, some pretty good NFL company to be in. There were some questions. Some people are saying, oh, is he going to be all that athletic? Let's kind of see. At his size, which is very good, around 216 pounds, he ran in the 4.3s. 4.3s, if you're not familiar, basically as good as it gets at the running back position. Sometimes you see somebody running the 4.2s, but 4.3s as good as it gets. And then you get to the strengths of his game. He has that NFL size and athleticism, his ability to break tackles, and also his pass protection is elite. And now he's joining a team that only got better this offseason. Not only did they add Benson himself in the draft, they had Marvin Harrison Jr., a top 5 receiver. They now actually have a number 1 option. They had Marquise Brown, but he was hurt the last couple of years, for one Kyler Murray. And then they also go out in free agency and add Zay Jones, which doesn't seem like anything crazy, but it's an upgrade from Rondale Moore, in my opinion, in this offense. They add Jonah Williams to the offensive line, Evan Brown. These things should help the overall offense, sustain drives, get into the red zone, which helps the backfield. So when I think about Trey Benson right now, where he goes in round 9 or 10 of drafts, depending on the platform that you're drafting on, he looks like a solid value for me. And actually, based on this Friday, so tomorrow when this video releases, updated fantasy blueprint, he'll actually pass James Conner in my rankings and become a top 30 running back. That's how good of a league winner I think he is. So we've hit on a wide receiver, we've hit on a running back. Now let's hit on a high end, in my opinion, league winning fantasy tight end. And I take you to Buffalo, and I want to talk about the second-year player, Dalton Kincaid, who was a sneaky offseason winner because Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis are now gone in Buffalo. And yes, the team did replace these wide receivers, but in my opinion, not with the similar level of talent. You replace it with Curtis Samuel, and you replace it with a first-round pick, Keon Coleman. Again, you're losing Stefon Diggs, who wasn't great last year, but that's still like 140, 150 targets a season. Will these guys be able to fill that void and the Gabe Davis void? Because we can start with the rookie Keon Coleman, and there's a lot of concerns on his film. There's a lot of good things he did. He's a jump ball receiver, but can he do more than that? That's going to be a big task when you're asked to do a lot right away in the NFL. And then there's Curtis Samuel, who's now reunited with Joe Barry. That coach and him spent some time in Carolina together, where Samuel actually had his best season ever. And look, I think Curtis Samuel is a talented player. He's still relatively young, like 27 years old, but is he going to fill that Stefon Diggs type of a role? No. Now the team wants it to be Keon Coleman, their rookie. You can see right here, Brandon Beane, their general manager, he's talking about how Josh Allen has an affinity already for Keon Coleman. He goes on, Brandon Beane, to say how they're going to need him to step up a lot and act as a wide receiver 1 in year 1. And maybe this happens, and just the fact that he'll have that opportunity is great for a rookie, but I'm concerned. Young rookies who are a little bit raw in college, sometimes they pan out right away in the NFL, but a lot of the times they don't, especially when there's a lot of expectations on them. However, the guy that I think is actually going to step up and be able to earn more targets, and he already had a full rookie season of success to kind of get that experience in the NFL, is Dalton Kincaid, who the Bills took last year with their first-round pick, 26th overall. And don't forget, they took him because all the other wide receivers went off the board. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers, those first-round receivers. So they said, let's just get Dalton Kincaid and act as a wide receiver, this guy. And then all throughout camp, they were saying, oh, he's going to be a slot wide receiver, and the season ends up happening, and he's not. He's behind the veteran Dawson Knox until Dawson Knox gets hurt. And then from week 7 to week 10, Kincaid saw 63% more yards and averaged 15 points in every game during the time that Dawson Knox was out. Now, ultimately, this ended with him ranking top 10 in total tight end targets and 14th in fantasy points per game, which is great for any rookie tight end to crack the top 15, especially when you consider he only had 2 touchdowns. Imagine if he just had 4 touchdowns. Not a crazy year by any means. He would have flirted with top 10 tight ends in production in year 1. So when we talk about the fact that this team has a lot of vacated targets, the second most vacated targets and receiving yards in the entire NFL. And you can see that right here, and this is courtesy of FTN. This is a free stat that they have. Buffalo, 173 vacated targets, over 1,300 receiving yards to go around. Yes, Keon Coleman's going to take some of those. Yes, Curtis Samuel's going to take some of those. I don't think they're going to take all of them. I think Dalton Kincaid is going to be a big priority in this offense. And in my opinion, in round 5, if you're not going to go with a top-end quarterback like a guy we'll talk about next there. I think targeting Dalton Kincaid is a league-winning strategy. And now let's transition to that quarterback position. We're hitting on every single position, a league winner right away. I didn't even plan it to be that way, but we have you covered, and obviously we'll talk about a lot more as this video goes on. But I want to talk about a guy who's outside the top 5 quarterbacks right now, and I think could easily finish as the #1 overall quarterback. He's on the screen right now, and that's Anthony Richardson with the Colts. As you can see right here, he currently goes as the quarterback 6 after CJ Stroud, which, yeah, real life CJ Stroud is great, but when we're talking about fantasy and mobile upside really matters, yeah, I think that's a mistake. Now, Richardson's rookie season was just a bunch of injuries. He ends up missing the rest of the season after week 4 with his shoulder surgery, and he missed another game during that time with a concussion, or at least he left one early. He actually only started 4 games in his rookie year and only completed 2 of them. But in those 2 starts, he averaged 48 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and finished top 5 both weeks. And then there was a third start in there. This was week 2 when he put up 17.7 fantasy points, which is like top 10 tight end or quarterback production for the week, in just 1 quarter. He did this on 2 drives. He had 56 receiving yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 35 rushing yards on just 2 drives. When you talk about cheat codes at the position, Richardson obviously has them due to his size and mobility, that combination, and then his big arm. And maybe you're new to fantasy, the NFL, or you just need a refresher, but just a reminder again, last year he was a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, 4th overall. He is a 244-pound monster quarterback who is one of the most athletic quarterbacks to ever attend the NFL Combine, the most athletic actually, which means he was actually more athletic than Cam Newton coming out, which is just crazy. And yeah, his sample in the NFL of 2 completed games and 4 starts is small, of course, but in my opinion, his situation is what makes him most appealing, starting with his coach, Shane Steichen. He left the Eagles, he coached last year, and for most of the year had to deal with Gardner Minshew and had this team on the verge of the playoffs in week 18 and being successful. That's how good of an offense he coached. Just imagine what Steichen's going to be able to do with a much better and much more athletic and just a weapon of a quarterback in Anthony Richardson. And then we can get into his situation. Of course, the running back position is going to be great with Jonathan Taylor. We don't have to worry about that too much. He's signed through this year. And then the wide receiver position, Michael Pittman got his extension this offseason. Josh Downs as a rookie showed that he could be dynamic and fantastic. And then the wide receiver 3 camp battle, it should just be our iron sharpening iron here between Alec Pierce, who should work well with a deep ball type guy in Anthony Richardson if healthy, and Adonai Mitchell, who's one of the most athletic receivers we've seen. He was great in college, flying by guys. These guys have a similar skill set. Adonai Mitchell might be a little bit better, but we'll see them kind of paint that out in camp, if you will. It's a good situation. Honestly, if Anthony Richardson stays healthy, I don't see a world where he doesn't finish as a top 5 quarterback just on like the rushing upside alone, let alone the big arm. Now, before we move on to this next wide receiver who is no doubt a league winner, I want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint, and I'm not going to take up too much of your time. Basically, if you want to win your league, you just come to this link in the description below, click get access, and there's a ton of ways for you to get the blueprint. A couple of ways through partners that'll make it risk-free for you, and then another option down here if these ways do not work. But here's the thing, this offer is completely risk-free. I will just refund your one-time payment of $10 if you don't make your playoffs. And you could see that right here. We did this last year, and basically 99% of people did not reach out because they enjoyed the product and or made their fantasy playoffs, but this is risk-free if you have any worries about that, so you get your money back if you don't make the playoffs. It's a win-win. Thousands of people have already signed up for the blueprint this year and in years past, so if you want to do so as well, you could just click the link in the description below or scan that QR code on the screen. And speaking of guys who went with the 4th overall pick in the NFL draft, we could talk about the guy who went 4th overall this year, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr. Now look, he's not going to surprise anybody this year. It's not like he's going in the 4th or 5th round like some other rookie receivers who will be in our must-have videos, but he's going in the 2nd round, the 19th overall player. That's still too late in my opinion, because as you can see right here in the Fantasy Blueprint, Marvin Harrison is my 16th overall player, and in the update that's going to be going out tomorrow, he actually cracks my top 15 and flirts with my top 12 overall players in all of fantasy football. And you might be a little bit worried saying, oh, but he's only a rookie. Trust me, I get that, but let me try and kind of ease some of those concerns for you. Marvin Harrison went with a top 5 and actually a top 4 overall pick in the draft, right here, 4th overall. This is where like Jamar Chase went, and he was being compared to Jamar Chase's and Julio Jones of the world coming out of college. These types of prospects, top 5, top 10 overall picks, rarely miss. We're talking less than 25% of the time. And then you just dive into the specifics of Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, his dad being a Hall of Famer and Marvin Harrison, that helps you a lot when you're coming up just learning the game. But in 2022, when he actually gets his first run at Ohio State against tough competition in the Big Ten, goes for over 1,200 yards while playing alongside some other serious and legit receivers like Jackson Smith-Njigba, and has 14 touchdowns. And not only was he playing alongside Jackson Smith-Njigba that year, but he was also playing alongside Emeka Egbuka, who is going to be a former 1st round overall pick. And then he doubles down on this in 2023, another 1,200 yard season when now there's even more attention going his way because Jackson Smith-Njigba is no longer there. And yet again, he has a 14 touchdown season with a different quarterback as well. He's no longer getting CJ Stroud in college. And according to JJ Zacharyason's late round prospect guide, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s 3 closest statistical comparisons are AJ Green, CeeDee Lamb, and Julio Jones. I mean, come on now. And honestly, you could say that he has tougher competition in college last year and really the last 2 seasons than he does this year. We're talking Greg Dortch, who's getting some, I would say, maybe not fake hype, but some hype hype in camp because they really don't have anybody else. Michael Wilson, a second-year player on the outside, who I'm excited to see his game progress. And then Zay Jones, who's a free agent signing. I think a talented receiver, definitely an upgrade over Rondale Moore in this offense. But will he start? Will he not? He'll probably have a battle with Michael Wilson. And look, here's some of the tweets in the press conferences. If you looked at this Kyler Murray video and you watched it, basically he says, if Greg Dortch was 6'3", he'd be a top 5 receiver. I mean, we're at the point in the season where everybody looks great in camp, and he says that he's unguardable. I actually do think Greg Dortch is an underrated receiver, but are we talking about a guy who's actually going to steal a 25 to 30% target share or anywhere near that from Marvin Harrison? No, we're not. If the Greg Dortch family or Greg Dortch himself is seeing this, I played you a lot in DFS. I played you in some of my fantasy leagues. I think you're great. There's just some differences here. And then we can talk about the tight end Trey McBride, who was recently in our overvalued players, just must avoid. Great talent. Third-year tight end here. I think I said second year. Third-year tight end here and Trey McBride, but he didn't have a lot of competition last year, especially when Marquise Hollywood Brown was hurt. It just led to a lot of middle-of-the-field targets for Trey McBride that I don't think are going to be there as much this year with Marquise Brown, Zay Jones, a couple of these other additions. Check that with Marvin Harrison Jr., not Marquise Brown. We're saying a lot of names here, a lot of names that start with M. You know, it's getting all boggled together. I'll try and work on that. But if we're trying to talk about league winners, Marvin Harrison, who goes as like the 10th wide receiver off the board right now, I honestly think there's a case to be made that he can definitely finish as a top 5, maybe even top 3, or even number 1 overall receiver if he really breaks out for that Jamar Chase type of a rookie year. I think that there's a chance it could happen. And of course, that's a small chance, but just a reminder, Cliff Kingsbury is not the offensive coordinator. He wasn't last year either. It was Drew Pensing, who we actually saw some things turn around with much less talent that they're going to have this year. Now we're going to keep going here, and we're going to talk about Chris Olave, the Saints' #1 wide receiver by far, and in my opinion, he is an obvious league winner that you can actually get later in drafts than Marvin Harrison Jr. Look, Olave continued the success that he saw in his rookie year, entering his second year, even though he had a different quarterback in Derek Carr last year. He ranked 21st in wide receiver efficiency and top 20 in points per game in year 1 with Derek Carr. And this guy is a crisp route runner at all levels of the field, and last year he was like top 5 in deep usage. That's kind of been his game in the NFL, but I think that's probably not where they want to have him. In an ideal role, he'll be winning in the short to intermediate parts, especially with a quarterback like Derek Carr. Now, there's just a few things that need to break right for Olave to be a league winner, and it starts with his new offensive coordinator. And that man's name is Clint Kubiak. He comes over from the 49ers. He was their passing game coordinator last season in 2023. Spent some time with the Vikings, spent some time with Denver the years before that on the offensive sides of the ball. So some really good offenses that he was a part of these last couple of years, especially last year in San Francisco. He'll be bringing over that Kyle Shanahan type offense. You know, the zone running scheme. You're going to be getting a lot of play action passing and getting receivers into space. And in theory, this should help Olave. It should help him get into space, use play action passing, get yards after the catch. And even if they run the ball a little bit more, it should be a more efficient overall offense, which means maybe more red zone drives and touchdowns. And as for Kubiak using Olave properly, which we really need for this to hit here, I think I see a Brandon Ayuk role. Now, I don't think they're the same type of X receiver, but I think that's the role you're going to get out of Olave, which means that he'll be used at all parts of the field, not just traditionally more downfield like he was last year. And part of this is just because there's not a lot of competition. Maybe you see A.T. Perry because of his size go into that X role, and then you see sort of this hybrid role for Chris Olave. Okay, A.T. Perry entering his second year showed some ups last year, but not a ton. Rashid Shaheed will be like his main competition, was mostly a downfield receiver. Wouldn't be shocked to see him transition to an intermediate type guy. And then they added Cedric Wilson in free agency, kind of just a depth piece, had some success years back with the Cowboys. And Bub Memes, a 5th round rookie, not really somebody that I'm thinking is going to have an impact, at least in year 1. So being used the right way with your new offensive coordinator is the first way we get that breakout. The second way that we need to get the breakout is not only his health, but the health of this offensive line that couldn't stay healthy last year, and that's why Derek Carr was just getting hit and leaving games early. I mean, Carr left 3 games early last year, so them adding Uda and Lucas Patrick, a big addition here, and then also in the first round, getting Talise Fuaga, a first-round tackle, is massive. So these 3 new offensive line pieces, only losing Andres Pita, an older offensive lineman, this is going to be a situation where I think the offensive line should be improved. We're going to have to see once they're out there on the field, see what some camp reports and obviously preseason says. But if this is the case and Derek Carr can just stay upright and not face pressure, which has just been the downfall of his career, again, that should be helping Chris Olave. So he's entering year 3, the prime of his career, Chris Olave right now, with no real competition. Like if your biggest competition threats are Rashid Shaheed, an older Alvin Kamara out of the backfield, Juwan Johnson, a former wide receiver, now a tight end the last couple of years, I'm not too worried. Now let's transition back to the running back position and think a little bit harder about league-winning running backs. What exactly does that mean? Oftentimes, it's a younger back who can carve out more snaps and touches in an offense and maybe even steal the running back 1 job. We've seen this in past years with guys like Miles Sanders, Jonathan Taylor, and Isaiah Pacheco. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to get that this year in Ty Chandler, the Minnesota Vikings running back. And look, here's the deal. I believe that this guy is a player who can win you your leagues in 2024. Because the best part is we literally just got to see it a year ago. We got to see his upside when he gets more touches and his ability to earn more touches in a backfield. Chandler averaged 5 yards per touch last season, while for a chunk of that season playing behind both Cam Akers and Alexander Mattison, but then Cam Akers got hurt and Mattison continued to struggle to produce. And this led to the Vikings giving Chandler a lot more touches that second half of the season from like week 10 on, and in week 15, oh boy, he finally got the start. 26 touches. He was like a last second second start. I think it might have been on a London game or some Saturday morning game. It just sounds familiar. 26 touches, 157 total yards, as you can see right here. 27 fantasy points. He was a monster against the Bengals in week 15. And then when we look at some of the offseason talk, this was back in February at the Scouting Combine. Matthew Berry asked this question. This is courtesy of the Coach Speak Index, a great Twitter follow. Basically, you're just getting Ty Chandler a lot of signal here is what he's saying. He said that there's basically, when you read between the lines, zero doubt that Chandler was the running back one to this point in the offseason in February, and this paired up with last season's words about Ty Chandler absolutely going to continue to see a featured role, and then he did get that feature role in week 15. Okay, maybe we can start to believe Kevin O'Connell. Until we couldn't, but that's no reason for Kevin O'Connell. It was something that just we couldn't expect happen, and the GM took over in Minnesota. Because the Packers unexpectedly cut Aaron Jones, and then the next morning he signs with the competitor in the Minnesota Vikings, and for good reason. The Vikings know exactly how good Aaron Jones is, better than anybody else in maybe the entire NFL. Jones had 11 starts against this team, and what does he do? Between his rushing yards 77 and overall receiving yards, he was averaging almost 92 total yards per game, which was significantly more than he did any other team in his career. At least any other team with that amount of games played against. I'm sure you can find some Cowboys performances where he's averaged like 100 yards. Now, the Vikings only signed Aaron Jones to a one-year deal as an older running back, 29 years old, but I do expect them to use him because he was still good last season. He averaged 5.2 yards per touch, and over his last 5 games had at least 110 total yards in each contest. But here's where my issue comes in. Aaron Jones right now goes as the 79th overall player. I actually don't think that this is like too early or anything. If anything, he's going like a half a round too late according to the fantasy blueprint. So that's fine. But let's look at the gap between 79th overall and then where Ty Chandler goes at 147th overall. I mean, we are talking almost a 70 pick difference. You're talking about a guy who goes in round 6 and a guy who goes in round 12. I don't think the backfield's that different. I'm not shocked to see it be 50-50 right from the jump or a couple of weeks in, but that's not how drafts are currently reflecting this. Because keep in mind, Aaron Jones is turning 30 years old later on, I believe in December of this year. So he's an older running back coming off of a year where he missed 6 games due to injury and was on the injury report for like 8 to 9 weeks. So when I see this ADP for Ty Chandler at 147, I'm thinking this is the exact guy that I'm thinking about. An older running back, dynamic, fast. He showed that production last year that he can kind of pop off and have a lot of production when he gets more opportunities. And now there's an older, aging running back on a one-year deal in front of him. What's not to like for a potential league winner? So in my opinion, and according to the fantasy blueprint, which again, you can check out, link down below, thousands of people are already using it. It's completely risk-free this year with 4 ways. Instead of just 1 or 2 ways like last year, 4 ways to now get it. Check it out, link down below. I think Ty Chandler, according to that blueprint, is a league winner. And now we can go over to another young player, and it's a rookie, Xavier Worthy, who's extremely young at just 21 years old, and he's shaping up to be a league winner after having a great offseason. First off, the offseason started with him breaking the NFL Combine record for the 40 time, and again, he dropped like 10 pounds for it, so it was kind of just broken on paper. He probably couldn't do that right now again if he had to. But either way, the dude is extremely fast and probably the fastest guy in this draft class still. But not only was it the fact that he was super fast, then he goes to the NFL draft, and right here you can see the Chiefs trade up for Worthy to take him with a first-round pick, their first-round pick. So anytime you're getting traded up for to go to a great organization, of course, Super Bowl winning team that is led by Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid on offense, yeah, it's a great stable situation for a young player. So all of this was great news, and then the team that he went to, their leading receiver last year, Rashee Rice, then has 2 off-field incidents. Not 1, but not 2, and is now facing a suspension. Which means that to start the year, there's a good chance Xavier Worthy is going to start. Now again, he's a young player, just 21, and I know he's a first-round pick, but sometimes we see these guys, just like last year with Quentin Johnson, struggle, so I wouldn't be shocked if there is a world where maybe Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, again, this seems hard to believe, or Justin Watson are still starting over Xavier Worthy in either 2 or 3 wide receiver sets. I just want you to be aware of that risk, because that's really like one of the only risks we're dealing with here. Because like I said, last year Quentin Johnson was a first-round pick, and he obviously couldn't even beat out Josh Palmer in the Chargers training camp. But the difference is that we've seen a lot of production out of Xavier Worthy. Quentin Johnson had like 1 year at a smaller school. Xavier Worthy goes to Texas. Well, maybe not a smaller school, TCU. It's similar level to Texas. I would say Texas has a little bit tougher competition when they're trying to take on actively opponents like Alabama each year. But you can see right here, no problems. Right away, as an 18-year-old, 104 targets. Then as a 19-year-old, 117, 121 this last year with his best season playing next to Adonai Mitchell and JT Sanders. Those are 2 guys with Tavion Sanders that are in the NFL now. This still produced 1,000 yards. All this is great. 3 years of production, which is something that a guy like Quentin Johnson and other guys who have busted just didn't have. And not to mention the elite speed. So there's a good chance, like let's say he is out there starting week 1 and Rashee Rice is suspended. So obviously Travis Kelce will be there, and then Marquise Brown, who I think is the wide receiver 1 on this team because he's just shown for 4 straight years that he can earn targets in the NFL and he's more experienced in my opinion. But there's no doubt about it that as long as Xavier Worthy's out there in 2 wide receiver sets, that is valuable. And even though I think the Chiefs are going to want to continue to run the ball, that's how they had success and won the Super Bowl last year, this team is still going to throw a lot. They were third in pass rate last year, even while running more on a per play basis. And if Xavier Worthy for 4 to 6 plus weeks, depending on when Rashee Rice is suspended, is going to get that connection and first team reps in camp and practices and games with Patrick Mahomes, him going as the 83rd pick in the 7th or 8th round of the drafts right now is an extreme value for me, in my opinion, even if he then has to split the role with Rashee Rice. But if he just has all that usage and time with Mahomes, maybe he just takes the job from him. So Worthy has league winning upside, and so does this next receiver, who honestly is probably the latest guy that we'll talk about in this video who can actually win you your leagues. Now, that receiver who's going super late that I think can win you your leagues is Khalil Shakir, who in my opinion is like the forgotten man right now in the Bills passing game, because he goes as the 4th Bills pass catcher off the board when we include tight end Dalton Kincaid, and he goes after guys like Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman. He's currently going right now as a 10th round pick in drafts. Even though there's a realistic world where Khalil Shakir leads this team and receiving room in targets, I wouldn't be shocked if he's outpacing the rookie Keon Coleman or Curtis Samuel. Now, if you look at his career stats, you might not be all impressed, but I actually am impressed with what he did last year. As a rookie, he only had 20 targets. Okay, he was dealing with Stephon Diggs, Isaiah McKenzie, Gabe Davis, a bunch of other guys, and he was a 5th round rookie. Last year, though, he sees twice as many targets, 45, catches 39 balls, 4 times as many balls, and he puts up a pretty nice stat line. You can see here, over 600 receiving yards on those 39 receptions, averaging over 15 yards per catch. He's a downfield guy. He's a yards after the catch guy. He's really talented. And keep in mind, he put up over 600 yards last year while still having to compete with Stephon Diggs and James Cook out of the backfield and Dalton Kincaid and Gabe Davis. And what's even better is it wasn't like he was sporadic. We actually saw a specific shift in his usage from week 8 on to him becoming a full-time player. The Bills changed offensive coordinator, starting using more 3 wide receiver sets, and you can see right here, you can see like week 8, he's only playing like 12% of the snaps, 20, 30%, because they're only using 2 wide receiver sets, Gabe Davis and Steph Diggs. He can't get on the field. Week 8, though, you see a little bit of a offensive coordinator change, a little bit of Dawson Knox being hurt. They use some more 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. You get 64% of the snaps. And then suddenly he's playing over 70% of the snaps basically every week. It hits the 80s some weeks, and it's looking good for Khalil Shakir. And from week 8 on, he posted 15 or more points in 42% of his games, which might not sound like a lot, but for fantasy football, it is. 5 out of 12 games, you're putting up over 15 fantasy points, a borderline wide receiver 1, top 20 performance for sure. And that's while competing with guys like Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis who aren't there anymore. Again, I'll show you the vacated targets from FTN, 173, over 1,300 receiving yards. The second most opportunity is on the table now for these guys like Dalton Kincaid we talked about earlier and Khalil Shakir. I'm just finding a little bit more trust in the guys who have already been there at their current draft positions than a 1st round rookie in, or a 2nd round rookie technically in Keon Coleman, the top of the 2nd round, and also Curtis Samuel, a new addition to the team. Think he's talented, but I just rather have these guys who've already been there with Josh Allen. And it's actually been Khalil Shakir who's the most tenured pass catcher in this wide receiver starting rotation out of those guys, and even Dalton Kincaid, because this is Shakir's 3rd season with Josh Allen in this offense. And if it's worth anything to you, we just recently got to see Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, say some nice things about the camp, the OTAs that Khalil Shakir is having. Seeing evolution from his game last year was huge. That's what we talked about. He had 4 times as many catches, 2.5 times as many targets, a lot more receiving yards. He's everything you look for in a wide receiver, and I believe that. He can do things after the catch. He's athletic. He's good in the short area. He's good downfield. So currently in round 10, and according to the Fantasy Blueprint, Khalil Shakir to me is a nice value. He's the cheapest Buffalo Bills receiver with Josh Allen and is going to start. I like that. Now, we couldn't leave this video without me saying, do not forget about Rome Odunze and the Chicago Bears. Please, I beg of you. Because Odunze is quietly being forgotten because, of course, there's a lot of wide receivers now on the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore coming off of nearly a 1,400-yard season. Keenan Allen, who just led the NFL in targets per game with over 11.5 targets per game a year ago with the Chargers, is now on this team. And then there's Rome Odunze. I get it. A lot of competition. And right now, a lot of people believe that Keenan Allen and DJ Moore are going to be starting in 2 wide receiver sets, which means the rookie and Odunze won't be, but I don't think I believe that. Because Keenan Allen is more naturally a slot wide receiver. Odunze in college was basically only an outside downfield weapon of a receiver. But despite this, right now, Keenan Allen is going as the 49th overall player. On some sites, he's going as a top 45 player. And if you wanted to see where his teammate is going to be going right now, and we can keep scrolling here because you're going to have to scroll for a while, in Rome Odunze, it is rounds later. We're talking 20 plus picks later, all the way down here, 91st overall pick. He goes 40 plus picks later, 4 rounds or so later than Keenan Allen. That's a mistake. I think this should be flipped. This is very similar to stuff that I've been talking about with the Houston Texans. A lot of people think Stephon Diggs is going to start in 2 wide receiver sets. He might, but there's a good chance Tank Dell does because that's what he did last year, and he was better than Diggs last year. Diggs will probably be the slot receiver at some point, if not the entire year. And that's how I feel about Rome Odunze, the younger and probably at this point better outside receiver than Keenan Allen. And that'll definitely ruffle some feathers because Keenan Allen was an outside receiver last year and earned so many targets per game, but Keenan Allen saw a lot of success in the slot, where I think he'll see a lot more success with a rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams this year when they're in 3 wide receiver sets. Because reminder, we can see right here, Rome Odunze, a top 10 wide receiver pick if you're not familiar, would have been the #1 receiver in most drafts if he wasn't dealing with Malik Nabers, who is one of the best receivers we've seen in the last 10 years, and obviously Marvin Harrison, who we've already talked about. And I just keep thinking about how I said that he might be a better outside receiver, Rome Odunze, already than Keenan Allen. Again, people are going to be mad, but let's just see how how the season plays out. Because Odunze is an absolute freak on the outside. He had almost 1,600 yards last year while playing next to two other now NFL receivers, was still able to earn 141 targets while playing next to those two other NFL receivers who were earning a lot of targets in Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan, who both went before the 4th round of the NFL draft. And now this offense is actually going to have Shane Waldron, who comes over from Seattle. It's not a lot of hype because the team struggled last year, but so did Geno Smith. Honestly, he struggled a lot. They didn't have Dave Canales anymore, but Shane Waldron still threw, and we can see right here Waldron's name. I highlighted, it goes all the way up here to all this stuff. Who knows? Shane Waldron still threw at a top 10 rate each of the past 2 seasons as the offensive coordinator in Seattle. If we could just get more passing for Caleb Williams in this offense, maybe all the guys, maybe Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze and DJ Moore can all come through. And in that scenario, we don't have to all get angry about Keenan Allen potentially busting in the 6th round as a 6th round pick. As of right now, I think he's probably going about a round too early, and I think Rome Odunze is going a few rounds too late, but we could take that beautiful value that we're getting. Because even if Rome Odunze doesn't win the job in 2 wide receiver sets, which I would be kind of surprised at this point if he doesn't, it would have to just him being a rookie like we talked about with Xavier Worthy, not picking up the game good enough yet, but there's been no indications of that in OTAs. Well, then I think that Rome Odunze as a 91st overall pick is a smash whether he only gets the job in 2 or 3 wide receiver sets, because he'll be playing at least 60% of the snaps in a somewhat pass-heavy offense. So these are the players as of right now, and of course this will change with the preseason and camp news and injuries that happen, but these are the guys as of right now who are league winners for fantasy football in 2024. Now, speaking of some of that camp news, if you want to see the guys who are currently skyrocketing up the fantasy football rankings right now based on some of the OTA and early camp news, well, check out this video right here to see those 10 players who are rising up the rankings, and should they be or not, we talk about it in this.